So today is called the miracle of meditation. Which is a phrase I like to use. And there's different ways that I would want to describe what the miracle of meditation is. But today the way I want to talk about it is to say that it's possible through meditation to break your current habits of reactivity, mental reactivity, and have the source of your awareness, the place you're aware from, slip into a completely different place than you've ever imagined. That's the miracle, right? So the reality is that we are all very reactive, mentally reactive. This arises, this occurs. This arises, this occurs. This feeling leads to that thought. That thought leads to this feeling. There's a kind of constant reactivity, which is often what we think of as consciousness, is basically the unfolding habits of reactivity of our minds, in which feelings and thoughts are constantly in some kind of reactive interaction, and it's all kind of moving forward, more or less on its own, and we're identified in there somewhere as somehow that's us. And usually we've chosen some parts of the reactivity and drawn a little circle around it and said, okay, well this is me, and the rest is not me. The rest of my bad habits, or my good habits, or my wounds, or my whatevers. So the miracle of meditation is the possibility that you recognize that none of it is you. Actually, nothing in there is you. Nothing that will ever arise in your mind as either a thought or a feeling is you. You are always the one that's aware of whatever thought or feeling is arising. And that awareness itself does not experience anything in particular except what it's looking at. It doesn't have any quality. So that's why in Buddhism they often speak about emptiness. Emptiness means that the place from which you are seeing is empty of quality. It takes on the qualities of what it sees by identifying with it. So anger arises, and what do we say? I'm angry. It's a really bad habit of language. We identify ourselves with things that are arising in consciousness, and because we identify with them, we think that's us, and then we think we have something to deal with, which is, I'm an angry person, or whatever it is. I'm this kind of person, or that kind of person. Part of the miracle of meditation is the recognition that you're not any of those things. Those are things that are arising, and that it's possible, with effort, a particular kind of effort that we're going to go into today, it's possible to relax all the reactivity. It is actually possible. It's not easy, of course, because the habit of reactivity is immensely strong at this point. And it's not just your personal habit of reactivity. I mean, you have your own personal habit of reactivity because you've been being reactive in different ways, probably most of your life, just like me. And if you really start to examine it, you'll see it's not an infinite number of reactive ways. It's kind of a fairly small, it's like a TV series that only ran for one season, but it's been playing for 30 years, And it's like, oh no, not this episode again. This is all they made was 24 episodes, and I have to watch them over and over again. But repeating them and repeating them and repeating them makes them very ingrained. And that's difficult. It's even more difficult when you realize that a lot of what's happening inside you is also the result of cultural habits that are not only just yours, but they're being shared by the people around you, so there's some kind of bigger agreement around the reality of them, because we all have them. And, you know, if you're the only one who feels a certain way, you start to question yourself at some point. You know, if you go around, do you feel, no, I don't feel that. Do you feel, no, I don't feel that. Maybe there's something wrong with me, you know. But if everybody says yes, then, you know, we all get into the, this is definitely true then. I have a thought experiment that I thought was interesting. It would be like one of these things that would be fun to set up. You know, it would be a bit of an ordeal to set up. But if you create, you know, if you had if you could make a little UFO that you could put way up in the sky that looked really like a UFO, the right shape and everything, and then you flew it up there, and you had hundreds of people in a park, but everybody was in on it that it was fake. And we have one person, and then the one person kept asking, "Oh my God, did you see that?" And everybody said no, they don't see it. No, right there, no, I don't see it. How many people would they ask before they stopped asking? Before they assumed they must be wrong, even though they were seeing it in plain sight? You know, and that's one of the ways that we get conditioned out of our deeper spiritual experiences, because we start asking around. Or maybe we were little and we determined we probably shouldn't ask around. But one way or another, there seems to be a cultural agreement about the unreality of certain aspects of our experience. So eventually we just conclude we never actually experienced that, and then it disappears. You know, you could do the same experiment by having nothing in the sky and having everybody saying they could see it. And how long would it take before the person also saw it? You know, and so these are the kinds of habits of reactivity, mental reactivity, that cause us to experience reality in certain ways, which may or may not have anything to do with anything real. You know, they're conditioned by social agreement. A famous anecdote, I mean, not so famous that if you haven't heard it from me, you probably haven't heard it, but famous within very tiny circles of people, is supposedly attributed to the German philosopher Wittgenstein, who was talking with one of his students and asked the question, why is it, you think, that for so long everybody believed that the sun was going around the earth, when in fact the earth was rotating the whole time? And the student said, well, he thought, you know, Wittgenstein's supposed to be smart. He's not as smart as his reputation. Well, of course, because it looks like the sun is rising. And Wittgenstein said, oh, what would it look like if the earth were rotating? Right? So the point of the story is, you know, a great deal of what we experience as reality is actually interpretation. And when interpretation is shared, it shows up for us as real, right? So a great deal, a really great deal of what we experience of reality is interpreted. So part of the miracle of meditation is, by breaking the habit of reactivity, you can leave the reality that you're currently experiencing and have the opportunity to enter into a new reality. That's a pretty miraculous miracle. You know, you actually have an invitation to a different world through a spiritual practice. The most challenging thing about meditation, at least the way I'm going to teach you meditation today, because meditation is a word that means a lot of things in different contexts, but particularly what I'm going to teach you today, the most difficult thing about it is that it's going to ask you to do nothing at all, which is by far the hardest thing you could possibly do, even though it's also the easiest thing because you can't possibly not do it from one point of view. So I said earlier that this requires a certain kind of non-effort kind of effort. The examples that I tend to like to use for that are long time ago, I was a cigarette smoker. I wasn't a very good one, but I was trying. I really wanted to smoke cigarettes. Like, it was the age, we hadn't learned about the fact that they were bad for you, and we thought it was cool because that's what the advertising said. So I was trying to develop the habit, but I didn't like it. But anyway, eventually I did develop a little bit of a habit, and so then I had to quit. So that was not so smart. But if you think about it logically, if I'm sitting here, it definitely takes less effort to not smoke a cigarette than it does to smoke a cigarette, right? Because if I'm just sitting here, how much effort does it take to not smoke a cigarette? It takes zero effort. You just don't do anything. But if anyone's ever quit smoking or quit any other kind of habit, you realize that it doesn't feel like no effort. It feels like it takes an enormous amount of effort to not smoke a cigarette. Not physical effort, right, but emotional effort, because the emotional reactive habits of smoking are so strong, especially if there's triggers, that you then have to make a kind of emotional effort that allows you to avoid the temptation of the emotional pull. So the other analogy I like to use for that is, if you would imagine that there were people tickling your skin with a feather, maybe like 10 feathers, right? And of course, there's going to be an incredible emotional pull toward laughing and reacting. But instead, you stay incredibly calm. What kind of effort does it take to stay calm when you're being tickled all over? And the kind of mental reactivity we're talking about is sort of the mental equivalent of being tickled all over. It's this constant tickling of, like, you need to look at this, you need to look at that, you need to engage with this, you need to play with that, you need to push this, you need to avoid this. Oh, you need to have this whole conversation with yourself around this one because this is your big one. And then 10 minutes later you go, oh, I'm supposed to be meditating. So what you're going to be asked to do today is to avoid the temptation to get involved with anything. Now, that's incredibly difficult. If that was the only instruction I gave you, then that would be very difficult. So I would say, don't get involved, don't engage with anything that happens in your mind. Sounds simple, but really, really difficult. But if I add a second instruction, it makes it much more interesting and much more possible, because I would say, don't engage with anything that arises in your mind, including if you see yourself getting engaged with something in your mind, which means you can't miss. You literally can't miss. This is the meditation that you cannot do wrong, because there's literally nothing that can happen in your mind that you can be unengaged with, including whatever you see that looks like you being engaged. So you just sit. So another way to say this, you just sit and you just don't make a problem out of anything, including if you see yourself making a problem. So boom, you really can't lose. You just sit. Literally, that's all this is. You just sit, you don't move, you don't make a problem out of anything. And if you see yourself making a problem, you don't make a problem out of that. You're just being perfectly non-reactive. And you can really get into it if you want. Go ahead, tempt me. Give me something to react to. I'm not going to move. You're not going to knock me off my center. The center being, I know none of this is a problem. I know nothing that's happening in there is a problem, and I'm going to just sit here. So that's how I'm going to ask you to meditate. And we're going to do a lot of practice today, and that's all you're going to have to do. Every time. And even though it doesn't take any effort, because all you're doing is letting everything be the way it is, and it couldn't really take any effort to let everything be the way it is, it's still going to feel like it takes a lot of effort, because your habit of engaging with everything and being the one who's doing something is so strong, it's going to keep arising as some kind of a belief that you're doing something. And all you have to keep doing is going, okay, just let that happen, and just let that happen, and let that happen. And don't identify with anything that's going on. Just be. So we'll do our first round of sitting. So just find a posture that's comfortable. Doesn't matter if you sit on the floor or in a chair. You kind of want to maybe just move your spine from side to side and find that place where it feels balanced. Where it takes very minimal effort to sit up straight. And then allow your breath to find its natural rhythm, that's deep without being forced, that feels easy and natural. And then just sit. Don't make a problem out of anything that happens, even if you see yourself making a problem out of something. Don't engage with anything that arises, including any ways in which you see yourself engaged. You can begin the meditation, and it will continue until I signal that it has ended.